Trump's immigration theater is reaching absurd new levels, and the consequences are devastating. While the administration claims fentanyl is such a dire threat that it justifies sweeping tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China, it's simultaneously pulling federal agents off drug interdiction duties to chase undocumented landscapers in Pennsylvania.
Canada lifted its retaliatory levies last month.
Yeah, well, we believe we've played a long time nice in the sandbox. And with the Section 232s, they're so horrific on our economy or certain sectors of our economy that if this meeting doesn't kind of break the ice on that, I think we're left no other option but to push back, fight back, and go from there.
Ideally, the union wants to see no sector tariffs at all, but they say they need to see those 50% duties on metals drop to at least 15% to feel any relief in the sector, which has already lost 1,000 jobs across the country.
We've seen similar patterns of misplaced priorities before, where urgent calls for action come from those actually affected by these policies, with union representatives warning they've played nice in the sandbox for too long and now have no other option but to push back after losing thousands of jobs to misguided enforcement priorities. The same political movement that built its base partly on QAnon fantasies about child trafficking is now dismantling the federal teams that actually investigate child traffickers.
Canadians need to be realistic in what we get for a deal. This administration in the United States is very transactional, where in every negotiation, someone has to be seen as winning and someone has to be seen as losing. We need to move very cautiously in that kind of environment. And I think there's a new reality on the table, and that is there is a price to access the U.S. market. And I think the days of zero tariffs could potentially be numbered. When the CUSMA comes up for negotiation, who knows? Who knows if zero will be the platform of tariffs in that renegotiation, or whether or not it'll be a number above zero.
Right, and again, someone else making the same point too about the fact about how different this is now to, and how different this relationship is, and it's about winning. Someone has to win, someone has to lose, and the U.S. president clearly does not like to lose. Are you expecting any news from today? There was the possibility of some relief from sectoral tariffs, possibly steel and aluminum. With the recent softwood lumber tariffs too going into effect. The president talking last night about small and medium-sized trucking companies too. Again, putting tariffs on that industry possibly next month. Are you expecting to hear anything this afternoon, or do you think this was just a meeting to hopefully advance some of what's coming?
I mean, who knows what's actually happening behind closed doors? Am I expecting something today? No, I don't think so. But am I expecting something?
This represents a fundamental shift in how we approach trade and security, where someone has to be seen as winning and someone has to be seen as losing, casting a long shadow over our entire approach to law enforcement. The days of zero tariffs on crime-fighting resources could potentially be numbered as agents are pulled from their critical duties. Meanwhile, the president, who's desperately trying to keep those Epstein files sealed, is pulling sex crime investigators off their cases to help process line cooks.
Let's move on to another breaking news coming from President Donald Trump. He announced 25% US tariff on truck imports from November 1. The US will impose a 25% tariff on imports of all medium and heavy-duty trucks. President Donald Trump announced the Truth Social. Over to you, Akanksha. It seems that President Trump and tariffs have a long-standing relationship. Earlier, it had been pharmaceutical equipment, visas, and now medium heavy-duty trucks. So what exactly and how exactly would India be affected by these tariffs?
This comes at the same time as announcements of new enforcement priorities that affect everything from border security to domestic investigations, with timelines being pushed and resources being redirected away from actual criminal enterprises. A new Wall Street Journal investigation reveals the staggering scope of how Trump's immigration obsession is gutting federal law enforcement to tackle the crimes that actually matter. Let's break down exactly what's happening and why it's so dangerous. The numbers tell a story of systematic destruction. Federal teams that once pursued child traffickers have been disbanded. Drug interdiction task forces have been redirected. Highway checkpoints on major drug trafficking routes have gone unstaffed. This isn't about border security, it's about pulling thousands of federal agents away from investigating drug smuggling, sexual exploitation, and organized crime to chase people whose biggest offense is working without the right paperwork. The scope of this redeployment is breathtaking.
We will not waver. A message to the Prime Minister. You're going down there Tuesday. You better fight like hell. Don't roll over and keep fighting.
Some officials have compared this situation to a kid going to the schoolyard and getting punched in the face every day, declaring it's time to hit back if we can't get a deal on proper law enforcement priorities. Roughly 20% of FBI agents, 2,840 out of around 13,800, have been diverted to work on immigration enforcement. To put that in perspective, that represents a significantly larger shift in FBI priorities than what happened after the 9/11 terrorism attacks, when 1,234 FBI criminal investigators were reassigned to counterterrorism efforts. But the real impact becomes clear when you look at specific cases. A federal team in El Paso that once pursued child traffickers has been disbanded. A Kansas task force focused on stemming the flow of fentanyl has been redirected. Highway checkpoints near the southwest border, some on roads long identified as major drug trafficking routes, have gone unstaffed. The human cost is staggering. Nearly every agent on Baltimore's domestic terrorism squad was reassigned this year to work full-time on immigration enforcement, forcing them to walk away from investigations of a network of violent predators that targets and exploits children online. Think about that. Federal agents who were actively investigating networks of child predators have been pulled off those cases to arrest restaurant workers. At Homeland Security investigations, dozens of agents who specialize in child sexual exploitation have been reassigned to immigration enforcement. Over the past 2 years, those HSI agents have assisted over 3,000 child victims, often through complex investigations. There's a good argument that these changes will lead to some child victims continuing to be exploited. The prosecution numbers are plummeting across the board. Federal referrals for prosecution are falling across agencies, according to data compiled by Syracuse University's Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. The Drug Enforcement Administration referred 10% fewer cases between May and June. The U.S. Marshals Service reported a nearly 13% drop. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives saw a 14% decline. The number of people charged with federal drug crimes has dropped to its lowest level since at least the late 1990s. Compared with the first 9 months of last year, 24% fewer people this year have been charged with money laundering, a charge often used against suspected drug traffickers, and 10% fewer people were charged with drug crimes overall. This isn't just affecting investigations, it's destroying the infrastructure that makes complex cases possible. Several current and former agents said investigations that require subpoenas, warrants, or grand jury testimony have been postponed or canceled outright. Informant networks are also fraying. Building trust with sources inside drug gangs or child trafficking rackets takes time in the field, investigators say, time they no longer have. The irony is crushing. Jason Hauser, a former ICE chief of staff, perfectly captured the absurdity. It's a good time to be an American-born criminal. When the FBI, DEA, ATF are all doing checkpoints in Little Italy tomorrow, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the Jeffrey Epsteins, the fentanyl traffickers, they don't quit. He also noted that Border Patrol officers who once specialized in inspecting cargo are being dispatched to states as far away as Pennsylvania to hunt for undocumented workers. Screening, inspection, and interdiction suffer. The administration's own executive orders reveal the contradiction. Trump's executive order states the objective is to end the scourge of human smuggling and trafficking, with a particular focus on such offenses involving children, while simultaneously pulling the very agents who investigate these crimes off their cases. Meanwhile, the actual work of combating human trafficking is being systematically destroyed. A key office charged by Congress with coordinating the federal government's work against human trafficking was gutted, with cuts at the State Department's office to monitor and combat trafficking in persons, decimating a team that worked to combat labor and sex trafficking abroad. The Human Trafficking Legal Center published analysis showing that visas for victims of human trafficking who cooperate with law enforcement to arrest and prosecute traffickers are being issued at record low levels despite a growing backlog. The broader pattern is clear. The Trump administration's immigration enforcement approach misguides efforts to redirect law enforcement away from stopping violent crime, drug smuggling, and gun trafficking to fulfill mass deportation agenda. The Trump administration's actions prioritize immigration enforcement, including toward people with no criminal history, over tackling true public safety threats. A DHS directive co-ops personnel and resources from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the Bureau of Prisons, and the U.S. Marshals Service to assist in immigration enforcement, even against individuals without criminal records. This new directive redirects drug and terrorism task forces toward immigration-related efforts, weakening public safety by pulling resources from critical missions as ATF and DEA work to hold criminal organizations accountable for crimes such as drug trafficking, murder, and firearms offenses. The scale of this misallocation is unprecedented. The Cato Institute published a report showing that 28,000 federal law enforcement officers had been reassigned from other duties to immigration enforcement as of August. Diverting law enforcement away from their duties investigating terrorist threats, child trafficking, and violent crimes to arrest people for minor violations of civil law makes Americans less safe. Even more telling is what we know about who's actually being arrested. Previous reporting has shown that more than 90% of ICE detainees have never been convicted of violent crimes. So we're literally taking investigators away from violent drug cartels and child trafficking networks to arrest people whose biggest crime is working in a restaurant without proper documentation. The domestic terrorism implications are equally alarming. There's been a national de-emphasis of domestic terrorism investigations in the Trump Justice Department. Agents aren't out there recruiting sources. They are not maintaining tripwires. They are not able to keep their ear to the ground about what's happening among extremist movements. As a result, the extremists have more latitude to do things that harm our society. The administration tries to justify this by claiming it's addressing crime through immigration enforcement. David Beer, director of immigration studies at the Cato Institute, explained, "They think they can take care of drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and child trafficking just by deporting people. But the evidence shows this approach is making Americans less safe, not more." FBI agents have been deployed to Washington, D.C. on street patrols to target violent crime, and some agents warn Trump's actions could backfire. My general fear is that the FBI and its personnel are not sufficiently trained to perform the type of work that they are being asked to perform. Somebody's definitely going to get hurt. The human cost of this policy extends far beyond law enforcement. Many federal line agents say they now have to split their days, with some focusing on traditional criminal cases in the early morning and migrant arrest operations during business hours. This fractured approach means neither mission gets the focused attention it requires. What makes this even more outrageous is the political hypocrisy. The same movement that claims to be most concerned about child trafficking and drug cartels is actively undermining the federal agents who actually investigate these crimes. The same administration that talks tough on fentanyl is pulling DEA agents off drug cases to chase landscapers. The administration's own officials try to spin this disaster. U.S. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche denied that the shift in federal law enforcement priorities was undermining other critical investigations, saying, "I completely reject the idea that because we're prioritizing immigration, we are not simultaneously going after violent crime with full force." But the numbers and the testimonies from agents tell a different story. Trump signed an executive order directing federal agencies to collaborate in combating what he called an invasion of illegal immigrants, portraying the estimated 11 million unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. as the driving force behind crime, gang violence, and drug trafficking, claims not supported by government statistics. The real tragedy is that this massive redeployment isn't even effective at its stated goals. We're talking about pulling highly trained federal investigators away from complex, multi-year cases involving international criminal networks to conduct immigration sweeps that could be handled by regular immigration officers. This represents one of the most significant misallocations of federal law enforcement resources in modern American history. At a time when drug trafficking networks are becoming more sophisticated, when child exploitation is moving increasingly online, and when domestic terrorism threats are evolving, We're pulling our most experienced investigators off these cases to chase people whose only crime is trying to work. The message this sends is clear. Despite all the tough talk about fighting crime, this administration is more interested in immigration theater than actually protecting Americans from the criminals who pose real threats. When the history of this period is written, the decision to dismantle child trafficking units to chase landscapers will stand as one of the most cynical and dangerous policy choices of the Trump era. The question Americans need to ask is simple. Are we safer when federal agents who were investigating child predators are instead conducting immigration raids? The answer, based on every piece of evidence we have, is absolutely not. This isn't law and order, it's law and disorder, prioritizing political theater over the safety of American children and communities.